What's up, everybody? We're here to talk about Alec Murdaugh and his team trying to remove Judge Newman from all future proceedings. That would include all of the trials he has coming up on the financial crimes. That would include the motion for new trial on the case he's already presided over where Alec Murdaugh was convicted. And then it would obviously also include a second trial if we were to get there on this motion for new trial. So we're going to talk about what the standard is, whether or not we think Alec Murdaugh's going to win, what we think about Judge Newman. We're going to hear some quotes from Judge Newman that Alec Murdaugh's team talks about in this motion. Hit that like button if you guys haven't already, and let me know if you're still interested in this content and what you think about this move by Alec Murdaugh. The overwhelming feeling of the internet, at least from how people are sending it to me, is negative. And they hate Alec Murdaugh because of this and love Judge Newman. And while I'm not going to be speaking at all about personally what I think about these people, I don't know them personally. We are going to talk about the legal standard and whether or not we think this is actually possible or even appropriate that Alec Murdaugh's team did this. And I think we have to start out by talking about why they're appealing this to a higher court and not to Judge Newman himself. Usually motions like this for a judge to disqualify himself would go to the judge in that case. But if there are extraordinary circumstances that would create such an injustice as the higher court needs to look at it, they can file this writ, and that's what they're trying to do now. And there are some crazy circumstances, the timing of everything, the quotes that are recorded that they can show and play to this higher court from Judge Newman, and the fact that there is an evidentiary hearing with a motion for new trial that Judge Newman might be a witness on, plus all of these trials that are being set up from all these different counties for all these different financial crimes, all being pushed down Alec Murdaugh's throat at this point to get them set before the end of the year, potentially because Judge Newman may be off the bench by the end of the year. All of those things I think the defense can argue are extraordinary circumstances, but this to me is one of the harder bars to get over for this higher court to actually even take a look at this case, as opposed to saying, go ask Judge Newman if he thinks he should disqualify himself first. Then once he says no, you can appeal it to a higher court. But to me, again, he would say no. And so maybe we're going to skip some steps and just have this court make a decision. Now, let's talk about whether or not it is appropriate to even ask a judge to recuse themselves. Many of you in the chat understand that this is a part of the process, and this is something that happens sometimes. I have seen people have sent some tweets from some lawyers from South Carolina saying this is despicable and this is blowing the reputation of Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin to do this to such a decorated and amazing jurist such as Judge Newman that everybody likes. I think Judge Newman is a great judge. I didn't agree with every call he made in this trial, but I think he absolutely knows what he's talking about, knows what he's doing, seems very smart, very intelligent. He's decisive, which I always say that's my favorite quality in a judge. But saying he should be removed or recused or disqualified from a case does not mean you think he is a horrible person or a scumbag or that his integrity is in question. And Murdaugh's team went so far as to put that in their motion, that they are not questioning his integrity. They don't think he's a bad guy. They think he's a great guy. They've said it so many times. What else can they possibly say about it? And they know that publicly this is going to be the backlash that they get, because it's easy to do that, especially if you're a lawyer, to say this to lay people. Oh, they want to get rid of Judge Newman because they hate him. When in reality, this happens all the time. I've gotten judges recused that I really like personally, that I'm personal friends with. Sometimes they're recused because we are personal friends or serve on a board together, make decisions together. So you can ask for a judge to be recused and still think they're a good judge and still not think they're a bad person. I know that's the easy narrative for everybody to say and to pile on the bad guy who's sitting in prison for doing the bad thing where he belongs because he's been convicted of a jury of his peers. But we don't always have to pile on, and that's not always the side that I'm going to agree with, at least. Now, that doesn't mean I think Judge Newman should be recused. We're going to get there. But I do not think that this is a personal slight or a personal attack every time a judge gets disqualified. They can be, depending on what's in the motion, but I don't think that they always are. So now let's discuss the standard of what it actually takes to get a judge disqualified from a case. It's actually not that high of a bar, and people were talking about it in the Delphi case for what's going on there with that judge, and I think they have at least something to discuss and look at because of all the crazy stuff that's going on there. But the standard is generally a judge should disqualify themselves if their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that they're impartial or prejudiced, not proof by a preponderance of the evidence, not a showing of good cause that they are impartial, but just if their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. So how can Murdaugh and his team question the impartiality of Judge Newman? I'm going to play a couple clips, but I'm going to add some context to them too to make sure we understand exactly how these quotes were made. This one was clipped up, and then I'm going to show another one from sentencing, and we're going to talk about some from some of the interviews that he gave. But let's start here.
But I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paw.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Maybe you become another person. In the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh, I sentence you for the term of the rest of your natural life. For the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably loved so much, I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life.
I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never.
All right. So that was number one. And then we'll listen to this. And again, in their motion, they basically say that, he said the jury got it right. He has a personal belief about Alec Murdaugh's guilt, which can be a problem. And we've talked about in sentencing how judges sometimes can say too much. I'm going to play this part, and then we're going to talk about whether or not I think Judge Newman said too much.
Son and I were out just enjoying life. Not credible, not believable. You can convince yourself about it, but obviously you have the inability to convince anyone else about that. So if you made any such arguments as a lawyer, you would lose every case like that. Cases you will never have an opportunity to argue anymore, except perhaps your own as you sit in the Department of Corrections. Anything further?
So this was after he said, remind me about what you said about lying. You can't convince this jury. You couldn't convince anybody you weren't lying. You just continued to lie. And I'm worried that that's never going to end. And it still hasn't ended now as you sit here and deny that you did this. Some other personal feelings about whether or not he did it. Now, I actually think, listening back to this sentencing and a lot of the interviews, some of which he talked about some of the rulings he made on other bad acts evidence and whether or not certain things should have come in and saying that that ruling was pretty controversial. I think he did a pretty good job of couching the jury decided this. You couldn't convince this jury. The jury believed you were lying. The jury found you guilty, and I'm sentencing you for that. I'm sure you loved your son. I actually think he didn't do a horrible job about saying this sentence is based on the jury and you couldn't convince the jury. So I'm not sure if, bad rulings or losing a case or getting sentenced to life, which I think any judge on the planet, including myself, if I was a judge, any lawyer or judge on the planet would have sentenced Alec Murdaugh to. So it's not like he showed impartiality with a harsher verdict or anything like that. I think they all would have given him the same verdict Judge Newman did. So I'm not so sure that they have proved he's impartial for the financial crimes cases or even a second trial if it were to happen in this case. We'll see if they come up with more or what arguments they make to potentially push that and show that they can at least reasonably question his impartiality. Because again, not the highest bar. So and I want to mention this, if he does get recused, if that ends up being the decision and he gets disqualified, I should say, do not take that as a dark mark on Judge Newman's resume. I'm sure he's been disqualified or recused himself from cases in the past. It does not mean you're a bad person, does not mean you're a bad judge, does not mean you have an inability to be impartial and be a good and fair judge. Just want to make that clear as well, because we don't know how the outcome of this is going to be. And I don't want anybody thinking that if this does happen, that they should think anything differently than what they already think about Judge Newman watching him in action trying this case. Okay, that leads us to kind of the third part, which is this motion for new trial. The standard also takes into account that a judge should not have personal knowledge about the disputed facts in a scenario. And it seems like the financial crimes and the murder trial, that he doesn't necessarily have knowledge of disputed facts, where he would be somebody who could say, I'm not going to believe this witness or take this into account because I was there and I know that they are wrong. And I could even potentially impeach this witness. Or I'm going to take this seriously because I was there and they are right. They are telling the truth. He shouldn't be able to do that from the bench, which leads us to, I kind of think he should recuse himself, at least for the motion for new trial. And I actually don't know how the rules work from there. If you recuse yourself from the motion for new trial, do you have to recuse yourself from the trial? I would think there'd be a way around that, but I don't know how they work in that courtroom. So we'll have to see kind of what happens. But I think the fact that he could be a witness in this hearing, that he probably should recuse himself. And again, I want to make clear, that doesn't mean I think that he's a bad judge or a bad guy, or that this should be a mark on his resume. I think things happen in a trial. When he was a judge, it didn't seem like he was happy about him at the time. I'm sure he's not happy about him now. And if they need him to testify about what happened with the Facebook post and what Ms. Hill said, and maybe impeach her or even corroborate some of their testimony or evidence of what the jurors said, we did this or that, or the egg juror talks about a meeting with the judge or with Ms. Hill, he could absolutely have knowledge of the disputed facts. He could have knowledge about what's going on, and he could be a witness in that hearing, which again, I think unfortunately means he probably should remove himself from making that ultimate decision. They do put in there his relationship with Becky Hill and connections to this and connections to the issues during that last trial as also a potential for his removal. And if the higher court finds that he ran his courtroom in a way that allowed or left the door open for this type of misconduct, then potentially he could be disqualified from another trial. If they find that his partiality against Alec Murdaugh allowed him to make these decisions with Becky Hill, then obviously that could be, that's on the much worse level. If they think he was negligent or incompetent in his courthouse, or even intentionally working with Becky Hill to try to convict Alec Murdaugh, obviously he'll be removed. I would be shocked if they found anything like that through this process, but it is possible. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions. You've wanted to know my thoughts on whether or not I think Judge Newman will be recused, whether he should be recused, and what I think of Alec Murdaugh and their team for doing this. I don't think any less of them. I don't think that should surprise you. I am a lawyer. We fight for our clients zealously. This is an appropriate motion that they can file if they have these questions and these problems and they question his impartiality. It's an appropriate motion to file. Doesn't mean they're going to win. Lawyers file motions, they lose all the time. If they do win, then they were right. If they lose, it was still an appropriate attempt at getting a fair and impartial case in its totality for their client. That's my opinion, one lawyer's opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Hit that like button before you go. I'm out of here until next time. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who might be interested here on YouTube. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, at Lawyer You Know. But on Instagram, we are still at Tragos Law. So look us up on there. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us, lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. Of course, all of these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.